You have to admit it's pretty cool that we can do talking heads in here. You're just not going to get that at a lot of services. But it made perfect sense. It was a good choice. The more I thought about this song, the more I thought this song has always been a favorite of mine since it came out, because it's always been this sort of understanding that I've noticed in the world around myself and my own life as I explored seminary and ministry and counseling when I was doing that in the early days of my career. And there's this existential sort of ennui that's just a part of life, isn't it? You know, I mean, we just sort of live our days out. And what a great sort of lyric. I just wake up someday and all of a sudden it's like, where am I? Who is this person next to me? How did I get in this house? And we don't ask it that way. Oftentimes that's the best way if we could actually ask it. But in reality, we just feel it. In reality, we just sort of suffer with it. We don't actually ask the question. But I think that's perhaps what our text this morning really addresses, is this idea in which we try so hard to find ourselves, but it's never really by going inward. It's never really by asking those questions until sometimes we're hitting the side of the head with something, or perhaps then just the existential question arises to the surface and we find ourselves asking that question. It's kind of an interesting paradox that I want to look at real quickly, and we're going to just do a couple of quick thoughts here. We have a communion this morning that we want to celebrate together, so I want to make sure we have some time for that. But I did want to get to this idea of what is ecstasy. Because we have this notion that ecstasy is something that's either a historical, sort of anthropological, religious reality that people in other cultures, perhaps third world cultures, perhaps other kinds of denominations that are really overly emotional and charismatic. We have this idea that ecstasy is this otherworldly experience. And certainly there's been that sense in which it is. There's this sense in which it is kind of an otherworldly experience. And I'll never experience that in my lifetime. Maybe back in the 60s I experienced that. I took my son, he's not in here, but I took my oldest son, Tim, with me years ago when he was 12, and I took him to a drum circle. It was happening out at the old Renaissance Festival fairgrounds north of town. Fair was over with, so who gathers at this place, you know, when there's none of the fairs going on? Well, all the fair people, all of the Renaissance folks, they gather, and they have their own reality. And in reality, if you know folks like that, that's their reality all the time. They're never out of the medieval Renaissance, medieval ages. But so they were gathering for a drum circle, and it was a new moon drum circle. And I, of course, was getting into drumming and working with facilitating drumming with camps and stuff. And I thought this would be a great experience. And it's off the highway just across from the big Lone Star, from the racetrack. And so we got out there about 7, 8 o'clock at night and knocked on the fence. So everything was fenced in. And we could hear drumming in the background. And then this face peeks through the crack and says, you know, why are you here? Because there's a guy and his son. And so I said, well, we're coming for the drumming. And he said, really? You're coming for the full moon circle drumming? And I said, yeah. He said, the full moon circle spring fertility right drumming? And I said, well, we came for the drumming. And so he had all of this qualification, and Tim didn't know what was going on. So they opened up, and there was about 150 people there. And we got in the drum circle. There was a fire in the middle. They were serving concessions here and there, mostly the locals doing their own thing, hot dogs and whatever. We were eating a hot dog, drinking a Coke, when some guy and another guy got in a discussion behind us. And the discussion was so interesting. One said, I don't think that it was evolution. I think it was the green people. They brought the first seed. And from there, we are who we are, and they're coming back. And the other one was going like, I'm not so sure they were green. And Tim's looking at me like, what are they talking about? And I said, theology. I don't know exactly. So we made our way to the circle. Well, the circle got intense. People were drumming. The fire got higher. They were circling around. The drumming got louder. People were spinning their heads. And one woman was starting to take off her sweater. It was towards the wintertime, so it was chilly. But when she started to take off her sweater, Tim looked up at me and said, Dad, was this what the 60s were like? And that was my cue to say, it's time for us to exit. And so we left. I'm sure there was some ecstatic experiences that were going to be happening that night. The reality is that we want these kinds of experiences. Some seem so foreign and so strange, we're not about to try that. And then other times we long for something that would completely swallow us up, that would just completely take us in such a way that we could literally do what ecstasy means. It means standing outside yourself, where literally we could just let go and be completely not ourselves. The challenge, though, of course, is to think why. When you think about all the various religions that do these ecstatic experiences and the various cultural experiences that go there, whether it's spinning like the whirling dervishes of Sufism, or whether it's the sweat lodges of the Native Americans, or whether it's charismatic speaking in tongues in a room with 100 other people perspiring and overwhelmed by the heat and emotion, whatever the reason for it is, I think the basic cause, I think the basic need is this existential question. Who am I? How am I connected? What am I connected to? How do I get connected? And that, to me, is sometimes what we miss when we become too caught up in finding technologies to get us there. I'm not saying that that's entirely wrong. I don't want to dismiss people's religious experiences or cultural experiences by any means. But there is something I think we miss when we fail to practice regularly, a practice which keeps us in touch, keeps us connected to what is already in our midst. And that's where I think the challenge is for us. So I want to suggest just a couple of things. I had a video that I wanted to show, but I couldn't get it to work. It was a video that my son and daughter-in-law took of the recent trip to Africa. They did a mission trip in Kenya, in Meru, Kenya, which is outside of Nairobi. And the mission trip there is so interesting. It's not all, they'll come in and they'll share with you more about that at some point in the future. It's one of, I think, our stronger mission trips. We do mission trips to Costa Rica and others. But this is less about building, and it's more about community. It's more about community exchange. And it's more about empowerment. So that this team, when they go over, they're not just doing vacation Bible school. They do some of that. They do singing and such because that's what's going on. But they also are sponsoring several schools that are involving the kids in both trade education as well as professional degree education. And they're very, very intentional about how this process works so that everyone's focused and that everyone has this sense of purpose to their lives. And he said that finally, my son had told me that after 5 years, it's finally coming together. This has been 5 years in the making. And now kids are really moving on to college. They're coming back into the community. It's a wonderful, wonderful way of doing ministry. But one thing that Tim and others, and Nancy Tully, who's been the director here of Volunteers and Mission, and now is moving on, and so she's not going to do this mission anymore. But one thing that she said is that she's just so excited that it's finally come together. So at the end of this experience, she came out to the middle. Now this is Meru, Africa, so it's lots of brush, lots of dirt everywhere, and mostly thatched and leafed covered huts, a couple of stucco-like buildings, no air conditioning anywhere, and no fans for that matter. And there's several hundred people, kids and adults. So they surprise her at the end, and the video shows that they bring her out into the middle, and then several hundred people surround her, and they just start singing. They don't have a gift to give her, an appreciation that says, here's your plaque, or here's your trophy, or here's a carving that someone carved just for you. They just start singing. And as they start singing, they start dancing around her, and some come out and start wrapping her in the cloth, in the multicolored cloths. And the more they do this, my son said that this thing went on for like 30 or 45 minutes. Now, Nancy's not in here, but I can just imagine what that's like. If you've ever been in front of someone and they say happy birthday and they all applaud. If you've ever been in front of someone and you've sang and they all applaud. Or you've read something or you've gotten some applause. It's always thank you, and you sit back down. It's hard to accept that, isn't it? It's hard to receive it fully. Sometimes we don't know how to give it fully. We just sort of do it. We praise the band, we applaud, and we're excited. I know we're enthusiastic. I think if we were really let go, we'd probably just keep clapping. Because it really is such a gift. It really is so amazing, the experience. But what can we give back? Well, they began to dance, and they danced, and they moved around her, and they just kept dancing. And then it starts getting louder, and pretty soon you watch Nancy, and Nancy starts dancing. And she's dancing in the middle, and she's got her hands, and she's just dancing, and it's like, I don't know why I'm dancing, but it's okay. And she starts dancing, and she says that after a minute, you get past that, okay, it's enough. And after a while, you just want to weep because it's so genuine, and you realize that they are giving what they have to give, which is their gratitude, but their praise and gratitude. And that when they give it, it's not a superficial, temporary, shallow. It's, we're not leaving this spot until you know how much you mean to this creation. And she said it was amazing. It's like, well, she didn't use the word, but I wonder, was it an ecstatic experience? She was so overwhelmed with the joy and felt so connected. So I was reading about this wonderful store in Austin, and it's called the Free Store. And I can't remember the woman's last name. Rachel is a writer with the Austin Statesman, Austin American Statesman, and she also volunteers there, was one of the coordinators of this free store on the east side. Well, it's basically what you think. It's a free store. You come and get things. People, we take things. Other people come and get things. She said it was wonderful. I felt so wonderful because I'm coordinating all these gifts being given to people. And then it hit her. The more she was giving to people, the more she realized in talking and conversations that she was receiving. Just a little bit, because she was engaging in conversations. But then it occurred to her that the more she started listening, the more she needed to receive as much as she needed to give. But she wondered if those who were coming to get free stuff realized how much they were giving. So she said she's made it her new mission to help everyone realize we're all in the same boat. We all need to give, but we all also need to receive. And it doesn't matter your state or your circumstance or where you find yourself. The true nature of the religious experience is give and receive and give and receive and give and receive. And I suspect that the more we can do that, the more we learn to be open to that connection, to what we can learn from one another and what we can bring to one another, that in that process, moment by moment, we begin to experience a kind of, not an induced ecstasy, not a high and unbelievable euphoria. We experience moment to moment how good and okay and fine life is. We begin to experience true joy, I think. It's a daily practice. And I want to suggest two ways that you might find that besides just practicing with the openness to give and receive. And I mean to receive from anyone. But in addition to that, I want to encourage us to spend some time in silence. One wonderful way of just reminding ourselves we don't have to be in control. And then I want to suggest a little technique from improv. You know, I've been taking improv classes off and on for several years, and I have the hardest time. You'd think, well, you used to be a performer. I am terrified. Improv is not about performing. Improv is about being present, and it's hard. It's about receiving everything as an offering. Everything is an offer. What are you going to do with it? What do you do with this information I'm giving you now? What do you do from the moment you leave here and what's offered to you on the highway when you're driving and someone pulls in front of you? Everything is an offer. Improv doesn't see anything as a contrast or a conflict. It's an offer. The conflict comes from when we say no. So they have this idea, yes and. So I'm going to encourage you this week to just practice a little seeing things as offer. As an offering, seeing everything. Somebody gets mad at you. You don't get along with your co-workers. Your spouse, your partner is doing something that just drives you up a wall. Try to see everything as offering. How can you respond? Now, of course, if we go to extremes, I obviously think if there's problems happening that are violent, that are destructive, that are denigrating, that's a whole different thing. And I know sometimes it can feel like that in workplaces too, but I think if we can begin to see things as offerings and try that yes and, just curious what might start to happen. And the other final thing that I wanted you to think about is this: have a discoverer's mind. And I've talked about this before, but I think this is a better way to think of it. You know, as a child, everything's curious, everything's open. There's all sorts of possibilities. What's this thing? We experiment with it. We try and play with it. We see what we bring to it. I wrote a blog on getting lost this last week. You can go back and check it out if you haven't had a chance to read it on ways that we find God and connect with God when we're willing to get lost. But I think with GPSs and whatnot, it's hard to have that discoverer's mind anymore. So I want to encourage you to have the discoverer's mind. Even in the familiar, try to see something as different. Try to see it as strange. Try to see it as new. Try to see what's there that you didn't see before. This scripture verse that we're going to look at for one more time next week, I think, is so poignant. In Romans. It's the old New Revised Standard one that you might have remembered, or if you were King James raised, you might have remembered this as, "Be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind and of your spirit." I love the way in which the Message puts it. Here's what I want you to do, God helping you take your everyday, ordinary life, everyday, ordinary stuff, and place it before God as an offering. And how do you do that? Simply by being open. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing that you can do for God. Fix your intention on the holy in our midst. I think we can lay ourselves open from moment to moment by trying to see things new, by trying to see things as offerings. Yes, and by being still. And what happens eventually is I think we are transformed. And it's a practice. It's not going to happen easy. It's not going to happen in one singular moment. But you will get glimpses of it. You will be surprised. Every now and then you will think, oh my gosh, I had no idea. I pretty much can guarantee that. Amen.